Hundreds of passengers bound for Chicago would be aboard the express train headed for the ruined Honey Creek Bridge. Kate told her mother that she would go to Moingona Station and have the station master telegraph a warning down the line. If she couldn't reach the station in time, she would flag down the train herself. Quickly, she took her father's old railroad lantern and filled it with oil. There was no wick, so Kate grabbed an old flannel skirt and tore off a strip. In a moment, she'd lit the lamp. Kate, if you go out there, you'll be lost and hurt, her mother said. It'll last effort to understand. I could never forgive myself if I did not, she replied. Her mother sighed. Go then, in the name of God. Because the front yard was flooded, Kate followed a path that led up the slope behind the house, then veered toward the shattered trestle. Her mother suddenly ran after Kate, but slipped in the water streaming down the hillside. Kate helped her to her feet, saw that she was all right, and continued on her way, while May stared from the window. Mrs. Shelley paced back and forth in the mud and water, keeping a frantic watch on Kate. Kate slogged through the rain until she came to the bluff above Honey Creek. From this 20-foot drop-off, Honey Creek Bridge had once extended across to the facing bluff. Amid the broken timbers and pilings, a small, rounded section of the steam engine jutted out of the churning black water. Only a bit of railing marked the sunken tender, the special car that carried water and coal for the engine. The unfortunate crew had been sent out to check for storm-damaged tracks. Kate would learn later that 2 men aboard the locomotive had been killed. Moving along the cliff, Kate waved her lantern. In response, 2 men shouted up to her. She could barely see them as they clung to some willow branches above the raging water. She called back to them, and they yelled something up to her, but the storm was so fierce that she couldn't make out what they said. Kate realized she could do nothing for them by herself, and time was running out for the midnight express. She turned and headed for the Des Moines River Bridge. Moingona Station and its telegraph were on the other side. Let's sing One Bridge More. You may use my wrench.
My life is a road that holds 100,000 bridges. The river flows below. What's one bridge more?
Kate struggled on against the pelting rain as bushes and brambles snagged her clothes. The lightning seemed 100 times more frightening in the open, but it lit the long bridge that was her goal. Inch by inch, Kate fought her way up the steep approach to the bridge. Though the span was normally a full 50 feet above the water, the angry river seemed only a short distance below them. Before she reached the bridge, the wind extinguished her feeble lamp, and she had no way to relight it.
Bridges link like train cars down the long line of my life. The river flows below. What's one bridge more?
Fearfully she peered into the dark, afraid that the midnight express might be speeding across the bridge. But no whistle knifed through the howling wind. No engine's headlamp hurtled toward her. Nearly 700 feet long, the Des Moines River Bridge was a ladder of cross ties, each nearly 2 feet apart. Though Kate had crossed the bridge in good weather, its splintery ties were studded with twisted spikes and nails to discourage such foot traffic. Those who cross a railroad bridge on a swiftly moving train can have no conception of the sensation a traveler experiences who attempts to cross on foot, Kate later said. One misstep would send me down below the ties into the flood that was boiling below. I got down on my hands and knees, carrying yet my useless lantern and guiding myself by the stretch of rail. Shivering from the wet and cold, Kate crept along, avoiding the worst buffeting of the wind. She would reach her fingers out to locate the next tie, then cross to it with the help of the iron track. Again and again, her skirt or coat sleeve caught on a nail or spike or splinter. Her hands and knees were cut and bleeding. Several times time, she nearly lost her hold on the rain-slicked ties. The hungry river was terrifying to Kate, who was near the spot where her brother James had died. Halfway over, a piercing flash of lightning showed me the angry flood more closely than ever, Kate would remember, and swept along upon it a great tree, the earth still hanging to its roots, was racing for the bridge, and it seemed for the very spot that I stood upon. Fear brought me upright upon my knees, and I clasped my hands in terror and in prayer, I hope, lest the shock should carry out the bridge.
Each step I take's another bridge to places I have never been. Each breath I take's another bridge to here and now away from then. The river always flows below and sings of things I cannot know. But with no river there's no road, and so what's one bridge more?
Kate braced for the crash, but the huge tree swept between the pilings, its branches grabbing and slapping at her through the ties. She was spattered with water and foam from the snapping limbs before the raging waters swept the tree into the darkness of the river. Without her lantern, Kate knew she had no hope of flagging down the midnight express. She had to reach Moingona Station so that a warning could be sent. So tired that she could only think of reaching the next tie and then the next, Kate began to crawl the rest of the way across the bridge. The cold numbed the stinging in her hands and knees. Raising her head, she took heart when she saw the lights of the railway station in the distance.
And when at last the road is gone, when there's no light to carry on, when there's no other bridge to cross, when all that's left is fear and loss, when I most sorely need a bridge, all I can do is be the bridge. When I most sorely need a bridge, all I can do is be the bridge. Each life is built with bridges, the same river flows below, a power and an energy no one can ever know. We think our bridges are so strong, we build them high, we build them low. The river always brings them down and says, what's one bridge more? My life has been a road that holds 100,000 bridges. The river flows below. What's one bridge more? My life has been a road that holds 100,000 bridges. The river flows below. What's one bridge
paused just long enough to catch her breath. Then, forcing herself to her feet, she ran the half-mile remaining to Moingona Station. She burst into the waiting room, where several men were talking, and blurted out her warning. Kate later admitted that she had no memory of how exactly she told her tale. She only remembered someone saying, "The girl is crazy." But the station agent cried, "That's Kate Shelley. She would know if the bridge is out." Then Kate, exhausted by her ordeal, collapsed on the spot. When she came to, a few moments later, she was lying on the cold, hard wooden bench. To her relief, she found that the Midnight Express had not yet come through. Much later, she would learn that the train had been halted 40 miles to the west at the edge of the storm. The passengers were safe, but other lives were still in danger. "The crew from number 11 still need help," Kate said. She quickly agreed to guide the rescue mission to save the men. Though others tried to get her to rest, Kate would not be put off. Engine 230, sidetracked in the Moingona station yard, was quickly filled with volunteers carrying ropes and shovels. As it headed for the fallen trestle, the engineer kept sounding the whistle to let the stranded men know that help was on the way. Riding in the cab, Kate must have held her breath as the train eased across the Des Moines Bridge. But the structure proved solid, and the storm was quieting at last. Exhausted, yet determined, Kate guided the others to where she had seen the two crewmen in Honey Creek. The men, number 11's engineer and brakeman, were still clung to branches above the receding water. There was no way for the rescuers to get down to the stream. Kate had to lead them up into the hills behind her home, reversing the path that she had traced earlier that evening to an undamaged railroad bridge beyond the house. Only now could they follow the track back west to reach the stranded men. By the time they were brought to safety, the rain had almost ceased, and chilly gray dawn had begun to lighten the sky. Shaking from cold and weariness, Kate was brought home. Her mother hugged her and put her to bed, mounding the blankets above the shivering girl. Let's come up and sing Let Me Be First.
I could feel
The story of Kate's bravery was telegraphed all over the state and across the nation. She was celebrated in countless newspapers as the Iowa heroine, but Kate was too sick to care. Over and over she repeated to Mame, "I can still feel the cold rain on my face." At one point, her teeth began to chatter so loudly that Mrs. Shelley was forced to send for the doctor. But all he could do was whittle a peg from soft wood. He told Kate's mother, "Put this between her teeth to keep her from breaking them." Strangers gathered in the yard to look at our Kate, as they called her. Some even asked for a bit of her skirt or a lock of her hair. Mrs. Shelley shooed them all away. It was nearly 3 months before Kate's strength came back. During this time, as she lay in bed, she was greeted by the trains that blew their whistles when they passed the Shelley farmhouse. Finally, one afternoon, she announced that she felt well enough to go outside. Escorted by her mother's sister and brother, Kate stepped out on the porch, hoping to catch a glimpse of the westbound train. To her surprise, the train stopped in front of the house, and crew and passengers leaned out to cheer her. Red-faced but delighted, she waved back to them. Later, when she was able to go into town, the trains would stop and carry her to Moingona. We'll sing Our Kate. Came to Kate in the days that followed. She received a medal from the state of Iowa inscribed, "Presented by the state of Iowa to Kate Shelley with the thanks of the General Assembly and recognition of the courage and devotion of a child of 15 years, whom neither the fury of the elements nor the fear of death could appall in her effort to save human life during the terrible storm and flood in the Des Moines Valley on the night of July 6th. There were other gifts and awards, but perhaps the most wonderful for Kate was a lifetime pass on the railroad. In the years that followed, she attended Simpson College and in 1903 became station agent at Moingona. She held this job until illness forced her to retire in 1911. She died the following year at the age of 46. Always modest when asked about her heroic deed, Kate would say, "I believe that God makes strong the weakest and makes the poorest of us able to do much for his merciful purposes." Kate's final train ride came on the day of her funeral. A special train stopped at the Shelley home to pick up her coffin and carried her to the Boone Depot. Her resting place is Sacred Heart Cemetery on the edge of Boone. And as a plaque near her grave says, "Hers is a deed bound for legend, a story to be told until the last order fades and the last rail rusts."